All right, we want to thank Rabbi Preis for preparing some Divrei Torah for us this Thursday night as we prepare for Shabbos. I'm going to thank everyone else for joining. Thank you, Rabbi Preis.
Okay, thank you, Rayalt. And actually, your words preparing for Shabbos will be very appropriate for the idea I want to address tonight. I want to look at what seems to be a misplaced verse in our Parasha of Tazria. And actually, as I address this, I want to share also that the Kollel's break, Pesach break, starts really next Thursday night. I believe we're set to not have a class. Let's hear otherwise. Well, no class next week. Certainly not the one following when we're busy checking for chametz. So a few weeks off, which also gives me the justification to address something pertinent to next Shabbos as we talk about this parsha. And I want to look at the verse 12:3, Yud Beis Gimel, which addresses circumcision. And we have a parsha that starts off dealing with impurity related to birth, and a lot of other issues related to impurity, related to various indicators on the body of something, tzara'as, slightly mistranslated as leprosy, but some type of malady that has to be dealt with spiritually. And most of the focus on that is purity, impurity, process, ritual, and thrown in the middle of the air is what seems to be rather arbitrary, the verse about circumcision. Now, it's true, we started talking about birth, but we weren't talking about everything related to birth. This is not the section dealing with life cycle events. We were dealing with the impurity associated with birth of a boy, birth of a girl, number of days, before she can go to the temple, the offering related to that. Oh, by the way, if it was a boy, on the 8th day, he gets circumcised. Well, this isn't the first time we've talked about circumcision in the Torah. Abraham was given the mitzvah of circumcision, and then not just for himself, to circumcise his son, at that time, well, Yishmael, then Yitzchak. And if it is pertinent information, let this verse have been back over there in Lech Lecha. And this is really something addressed by some of the Mefarshim, some of the commentators ask, why is this verse here? What's new over here that we don't know from that earlier reference to circumcision? And it seems to be that whatever is going to be the purpose here has to be related to whatever's new in this context. And at this juncture, the stress in the beginning words of that verse 3, it's a very short pasuk, Uvayom Hashmini, and on the 8th day, is the source of the fact that 8th day really dominates. And whenever possible, we do on the 8th day, again, if the baby is well enough, even if that means Herculean efforts to try to do on the 8th day, and 8th day dominates to the degree that it will override Shabbos. Uvayom Hashmini, on the 8th day, 8th, we demand 8, again, if it's natural birth, he shall have his milah, his bris, nothing stands in the way. It could be Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we do that bris on day 8. Okay, that's what's new over here, but why teach that here and not back over there in Lech Lecha? So HaChaim HaKadosh, in his commentary, raises this question, and he draws attention to the fact that had we been taught this back there, Abraham, this is so important, you've got to do it on the 8th day, now not for yourself, but later on for Yitzchak and potentially Yitzchak to Yaakov, 8th day is so important, do whatever you can to do on the 8th day, even if that means overriding Shabbos. Okay, that may be for an Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who don't yet have a commandment of Shabbos. But if we only taught it in that context, then we would move ahead into our history and get the mitzvah of Shabbos and say, wait a minute, Shabbos reigns supreme. And oh yes, even though Avram was told to circumcise on Shabbos, because circumcision was one of those very rare things that was actually dictated to Abraham to do, and Shabbos was not dictated, even if he self-obligated, recognizing the importance of Shabbos. But yeah, it makes sense that for Abraham, circumcision would override. But we have Shabbos, which really reigns supreme in almost every area of halacha. Almost every conflict, Shabbos will win. So maybe Shabbos beats circumcision. So it had to be told to us in this parsha, once we're operating post getting the mitzvah of Shabbos, back in Exodus and Mara and then in Ten Commandments, we've had quite a few. We've had many references to the importance of Shabbos, overriding the construction of the temple. We know how important Shabbos is. And despite that, now we're being told, Uvayom Hashmini, on that 8th day, make sure to circumcise his flesh. Now, that helps us understand why it had to be post the Abraham story. Why here would seem to be something about 7 and 8. Now that we're talking about she has 7 days of impurity and then the 8th day. So on one level, we have the Gemara makes reference to the fact that one of the concepts of day 8 is her impurity creates a distance between herself and her husband. So if we'd be celebrating this bris prior to the 8th day, it's at a point that the parents can't be fully in celebratory emotional state. So it's one of the principles described in the Gemara, waiting for the 8th day. After that point, okay, it has to be taught to us post our mitzvah of Shabbos. It'll be taught to us in this context to see that relationship between this 8 and that 7. The Ohr HaChaim though goes further, the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh, and he points a very interesting, almost irony. Circumcision is going to beat Shabbos. It's so important, but by saying it has to be on the 8th day, tells you that every baby is going to experience a Shabbos before his circumcision. May even be 2, depending on born on Shabbos, maybe a bris on Shabbos as well. But there's going to be an element of Shabbos in every baby's experience before the circumcision. And this element he shares with us is related to something about the very first Shabbos. And he refers to a Zohar, which maybe you're all familiar with. I didn't know this till today, but the Zohar tells us that the 6 days of creation had the world finished, but not yet fully firm. There was a degree to which, as much as everything was there, it was all in some almost solid state. It did not have a sense of permanence, as much permanence as we give into the finite world, until Shabbos. The terminology he refers to is the world was rofef v'roe, almost like wobbly. Came Shabbos nischazek v'nach. Came that first Shabbos and it was strengthened, and now is in a state of comfort. So too, there's an idea of a koach, of a strength that comes down to the world on Shabbos. That was manifest big time to all of creation. But here, every baby should experience a dose of this strength. And he describes things which may relate to our idea we talk about in the Shema Yasera, getting a boost of spirituality. He talks over here about having a koach chiyuni, an extra dose of vitality that is granted on Shabbos, and that every baby should have an extra dose of that prior to his bris. So again, aside from whatever physical development that's taking place over that week, there's that booster of spirituality in the fact that he has had a Shabbos and then the bris that follows that. And it's interesting, we deal with, so circumcision will override Shabbos, but you want to make sure he's had a Shabbos to have the circumcision. This relationship, Shabbos giving strength, circumcision having its need to have that Shabbos experience, even though again, the bris will override Shabbos, had me thinking about the fact that there is a Shabbos coming up, a lot of special Shabbos this time of year, including this coming Shabbos, but the next one is the one that's referred to as Shabbos HaGadol, the great Shabbos. And it's related to an experience in the other Torah reading, one of the other several Torah readings of this Shabbos. We'll talk about the taking the sheep of Egypt on the 10th of Nisan, and taking that sheep was deemed to be an element of both incredible display of our trust in God, because the Egyptians worshiped the sheep, and the miraculous that the Egyptians didn't get in our way. And it's a great, great day that we're able to take this sheep in the month whose zodiacal sign is sheep. I should really say sheep or goat, because again, the set could be a sheep or a goat, but typically we think of it as the lamb. In the land where they worship this lamb, and we're telling them we're taking this to slaughter it, that all happened on that Shabbos of the 10th of Nisan, huge deal, Shabbos HaGadol. And the question is raised by many. That's not the way Judaism operates. We don't celebrate Rosh Hashanah every year on a Sunday because the first Rosh Hashanah was a Sunday. We don't calculate if the 10th of Nisan was a Shabbos, which day do we leave Egypt and make our Pesach Seder every year that night. We go by the month. So we should celebrate that miracle and the display of our trust in God that happened on the 10th of Nisan, right? Moshe was told, tell the children of Israel to do this on the 10th of Nisan. He didn't say take it on Shabbos. 10th of Nisan was a Shabbos. So again, many raise this question. We should then highlight every year the 10th of Nisan rather than, and call that 10th of Nisan Hagadol, whatever day of the week that is, rather than Shabbos Hagadol. And one of the themes that's used in answering this question draws attention to our relationship with Shabbos and the unique element to which that Shabbos was a significant element in our relationship with Shabbos. Now, Shabbos predates that 10th of Nisan. Adam had a Shabbos, and Shabbos continues on forever, but something happened on that Shabbos that's a Shabbos dig idea. And the work Or Gedal Yahu describes that the Talmudic sources describe that each day of the week has a match. Many quote it as Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Aaron Feldman, I think, based on the Grow points to the fact that it's Sunday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Friday, in terms of what was created on each day. There's a parallelism over there. Discussion for another time. But whichever way you do it, one day ends up being the odd man out. And that's Shabbos. And the Talmud describes the match to Shabbos is Kollel Yisrael. We are the match to Shabbos. We're the mate of Shabbos. When did Kollel Yisrael become the match to Shabbos? Not in the time of Adam, maybe Abraham, but again, he wasn't really obligated to Shabbos, and that's not yet Kollel Yisrael. Sinai, well, okay, that would make sense, but is there perhaps a juncture even prior to Sinai when we can talk about some behavior of Kollel Yisrael that displays our unique Shabbos message to mankind? Well, given that Shabbos, our observance of Shabbos, our both Zachar and Shamor are positive in avoiding the contraindicated behaviors, are a display of recognition that despite our capacity to be many gods all week long, there is one sole designer, creator, who gifts us with the resources, talents, everything we need to be producers all week long. That's the message we declare every Shabbos. The first declaration of that was on the 10th of Nisan when we took that sheep. Because when we said, hey, Egypt, you think that's a god? Hey, zodiacal symbol of the Tla, you think you're in charge? We know it's really in charge. And we are loyal to that God. We're ready to display our trust in that God because we know that there's nothing you can do if he wants this to happen. And your thought as to whatever forces in the world have their power and authority, they're all agents of God. Our display that we recognize the message of Shabbos and that it's not simply a creator who put the world on autopilot, but a creator who maintains his involvement, as was so manifest in Egypt's experience and taking us out of this troubling situation through the intervention with every different manipulation of the laws of nature. How do we know that we recognize that? Our behavior on that 10th of Nisan. Our behavior on that 10th of Nisan was a very Shabbos focused message that we were displaying, that we're in sync with that idea of Shabbos. And it's described that that was the Shabbos on which the Shabbos and Israel union took place. Hence the Shabbos Hagadol. And it's intriguing because one of the other answers given, so why we make a big deal about next Shabbos is Shabbos Hagadol as opposed to 10th of Nisan, is that there was another event that took place on the 10th of Nisan. About 40 years later, we crossed the Jordan into Israel on the 10th of Nisan. And were we to celebrate the 10th of Nisan every year, we might kind of think a little bit myopic, the most recent event, and not look back to the previous event. And that's a suggestion of why, like, God wants us to, God, I guess the sages understood that the right message is to focus on the story, what took place with the taking of the sheep. That's so important to recognize that. We'll focus on that by dealing with that it took place in a Shabbos, remembering it that way. I think there may be a level of depth over here that crossing the Jordan was amazing. That's purely what God did for us. In God wanting us to be attentive to what took place in that 10th of Nisan, there it was mutual. It's God's doing it for us because we're doing it for him. Right? We're displaying our loyalty, our conviction, that trust. And God is matching that by having the Egyptians say, okay, take the sheep. They're held at bay. We didn't know that was going to happen until we built up the guts to go and make that ask. Hey, we need some more sheep. And again, a lot of Jews had their own sheep. fairly likely 600, 3,500 men of military age, call that at least a few 100,000 families needing sheep. Now, a good chance we had to come upon a lot of Egyptian sheep. Later on, the text will say mishchu ukahu. If you have your own, take your own. Purchase who you're purchasing from, clearly from the Egyptians. So we had to have that conviction to go take the sheep, and God matches it by providing the miracle that none of us suffer as a result. So we were meant to remember that next Shabbos, on Shabbos HaGadol, this Shabbos, as reflecting on this verse thrown in over here, remembering that the mitzvah of Milah on the 8th, which represents breaking out of the natural world that overrides even the natural world that's represented by Shabbos, and that will override the Shabbos, but built in at the same time that there can be no such thing as a Jewish baby boy being inducted in this process, in this ceremony, without his having tasted Shabbos and the boost of Shabbos that we get as a result of our being that match for Shabbos. And in what we do in our displays of Shabbos, God provides for us as well. So I wish you all both a good Shabbos. We should be blessed with that koach chiyuni that he talks about, and the Shem Yisrael, all those elements that give us that boost on the Shabbos as we celebrate each week, so that our upcoming Shabbos, is this special one coming up now, Shabbos HaGadol, should all be celebrated both appropriately, fully, and give us all that positive bounty as a result. And thank you, Rabbi Alt and Golf Manor, and all on board for allowing me to share this.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi Preis. Yes, a good Shabbos. And yes, we'll make these Shabbosim leading up to Pesach powerful. You should kayak. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and wish you all a wonderful Shabbos as well.
All the best.
Kayak.